Help! Help!
Hootman! Sounds like trouble a-brewing at the old well.
Help me, please! I fell down the well!
I'll get help, laddie!
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans, brought to you by ThatShelf.com. Every episode, we talk about a movie parodied on The Simpsons. Maybe it was The Simpsons that introduced us to the film, or maybe when we finally saw it, we realized, hey, that's where that Simpson joke came from. Regardless, each week we pick one that one of us hasn't seen, or hasn't seen in a while, watch it, and come together to discuss. I'm your host, and joining me as always is the Jacob Q. Boot to my Herbie Cook, my co-host, Nate Storing. How are you today, my friend?
I'm feeling like a boot, apparently.
Well, I didn't want either of us to have to be Tatum, because that felt not on brand for either of us.
Yeah, I get you.
Neither of us are that evil. So this week we watched Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole from 1951, which you might remember from such Simpsons episodes as Season 3's Radio Bart and possibly Season 8's The Springfield Files. I added that in myself just because that one has that's the episode, the X-Files episode with the alien, and they sort of revisit a bunch of the media circus sort of surrounding the event elements, which you pointed out that you think is more related to Roswell, which 100% it is, but I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's they're also peeling some of the imagery from this. Maybe not, but Radio Bart absolutely is. So that's the episode that we're going to be talking about today. Season 3, episode 13, although if you're watching on Disney Plus, episode 12, but we'll just ignore that for right now. Directed by Carlos Baeza, written by the great John Vitti. Original air date, January 9th, 1992, 41 years after the release of this movie. Yeah. And if you don't remember, this is the episode where Bart tricks the town into thinking a little boy is trapped in a well, only to ultimately end up trapped himself. So before we jump into the reference, Nate, thoughts on this episode, memories of this episode?
Oh yeah, I love this episode. It's a classic, right? It's, a perfect Bart episode because he gets to pull this very elaborate prank. It's also a perfect Springfield episode because you get the kind of mob mentality thing going on, which I feel like is very much riffing on this movie and other stories like it. But yeah, no, it's a great episode. What about you?
Yeah, it's funny. We haven't really ventured as much into these early episodes, perhaps as I would like to. But one of the things that struck me, I love this episode. It's a classic episode. I remember I babysat one of the neighborhood kids one time, and I brought over my Simpsons DVDs because I was like, what do you do for a couple hours babysitting a 10-year-old boy? And I was like,
right.
Do you want to watch The Simpsons? Are you allowed? I was like, hey, are you allowed to watch The Simpsons? And he's like, what's The Simpsons? And I was like, whatever. Your parents seem fine. And this was one of the episodes I chose to watch with him. I don't know why I remember this, but I do. But yeah, I feel like it's a classic sort of early era Simpsons story. I love how much the kids behave like kids in this episode.
Right.
And it is an example of the show in its early days sort of behaving like a more traditional sitcom in that there's a 3-act structure, they're all related, there's none of this sort of wacky we're gonna do something in the first commercial or before the first commercial break that has nothing to do with the rest of the episode.
Well, I don't know about that. There's definitely a bit of a sort of switcheroo. Because it's kind of 2 acts, right? It's the first act is Bart's birthday, and then the second act is the well story. Right?
Yeah, but Bart's birthday,
and the pivot point is the gift.
Yes, but it's very clearly setting that up, and that feels like a more natural setup than they're going they find their skis because of the Olympics. They go skiing. Marge breaks her ankle, and then Lucille Ball shows up by the end of the episode. Right? You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
It's a more sort of A to B, B to C kind of narrative, which I kind of appreciated. So, and again, it's funny. We were sort of discussing recently how often these episodes end up being John Swartzwelder episodes. It's fun that we're finally talking about a John Vitti episode, because I remember when I first started getting my DVDs and listening to the commentaries and sort of being more aware of the writers of the show and who the writers were and what they did. I was sort of saying John Vitti, I think, is my favorite Simpsons writer. I think now I realize I'm more of a Schwartzwelder, and like Oakley and Weinstein, they sort of like, they have creeped up there. But I do think in terms of the early days, Vitti is kind of one of the greatest writers that they had on the show. So it's nice that we get to actually discuss one of his episodes.
Well, totally. And I do think, like, you know, Oakley and Weinstein have like talked about wanting to get back to the feel of seasons 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. And I would say John Vitti was like a big part of what sort of made these seasons feel the way they felt. Right.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk us through the references on this, Nate. What I think was really interesting watching this is that this is one of those early examples of an episode where I think it sort of aligns with my initial premise for this show, in that it's like they're not just riffing on visual language from a film, but more taking a plot from a film and doing the Simpsons version of that. So while there is visual references, it's more like a plot reference to the movie we're going to talk about, and then there's visual references to other movies.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of similar to the fortune cookie in terms of the way that they use it. So I guess, you know, just backing up, like on the commentary, Matt Groening explicitly says this episode was inspired by Ace in the Hole. And he sort of points out, it's like, he likes it. He thinks it's a good movie, but it was a huge flop in its time. And interestingly, too, hard to rent at the time that they were making the episode. So It's also got a bit in common with Sorcerer in terms of like, this is not a movie that they're necessarily expecting everyone to understand, like the reference.
Totally.
Right. It's just something that they're inspired by and that they find interesting, and that's what they're, you know, and maybe there is like a very small audience. I mean, Sorcerer, there's kind of an audience of one that they were interested in. But like with this, it's like there's probably some handful of people that remember this coming out and did have fond memories, but it's not a broad audience.
Especially with it being 41 years old at this point.
Right.
Like, this is a deep cut, as it were.
A one percenter, as I've now discovered they describe some of these jokes, right? A joke for 1% of the audience.
Right.
So like what they're really taking inspiration from, even then, it's like it's very tangential in a lot of ways, right? Mm-hmm. Because in a lot of ways, this story is more like The Boy Who Cried Wolf in terms of the structure of it.
Yeah.
But the idea of someone being trapped in a dark place, not a well, a cave in the movie, and the sort of media circus and hysteria that sort of pops up around it, that's really, you know, I guess what they're drawing on the most. And there are a couple other details as well. Like in particular, you have the original song that is written for Bart.
Yes.
And we're sending our love down the well. All the way down.
Which is mostly a parody of We Are the World, but the idea of that, it actually happens in this movie as well. There's a similar moment where like a country western singer writes a song for Leo, who's trapped in the cave, right?
Leo, oh Leo, Leo, Leo.
So there's definitely some stuff like that going on as well. And the one other little nod that I noticed was at one point Chief Wiggum says to Bart that he played them for a bunch of saps. And there's actually a line in this movie where Tatum, the main character, actually warns a fellow journalist, like, that's the one thing you should never do is play the audience for a bunch of saps. So that feels like a pretty direct nod as well. But yeah.
The one thing I wanted to highlight too is I love in the movie, as you mentioned, that they have this country western singer who's singing the song, and we hear it and it's playing, but then they're also selling sheet music to the song, which I thought was like this interesting sort of, again, it's like, how can we make money out of this? And then of course I love how in this in the episode when Ken Brockman's like, so how much money are you gonna make? And they're like,
well, we gotta pay for promotion, shipping, distribution. You know, those limos out back, they aren't free. Whatever's left, we throw down the well.
Which is just like this wonderfully cynical sort of analysis of these, celebrity-led, like fundraiser anthems,
right? Charity concerts, charity
songs, and I think that was one of sort of the main criticisms of, you know, Live Aid and the Band-Aid and all that stuff was like, okay, well, great, you're making all this money. How are you going to get the money to the people who need it? Like, and it was this where Kresty's like, we'll just throw it down the well. So it's just, it's a fun little, again, very Simpsons-y take on the very real criticism that is related to those sort of things. So
Yeah, I think, the word you used, cynical, really is, I think, the through line. Like, that's got to be, I think, what attracts Matt Groening, maybe particularly, but many of the Simpsons writers to this movie, is that it is an incredibly cynical movie, which I think is, we'll get into it, but that's part of, I think, how people reacted to it, was that it is, even for Billy Wilder, who can be a fairly cynical director, this is maybe his like most unvarnishedly cynical take on America. And,
I have a great quote about that we'll get to later on. So don't let me end this recording without. If I forget to bring it up, don't let me forget to bring it up. But before we get too far into that, though, let's talk through some more of the references, because again, this is one of those examples of the main plot is maybe taking reference from one film, but there's plenty of other movie references to pull from as well.
Yeah, totally. So one of the first ones, which we have to cover this movie on the podcast because I think it could be hilarious to cover, but it's a reference to Convoy, which is a movie based on a novelty song.
Yep.
Called Convoy, which is about truckers and what is it called? Shortwave radio.
CB radio.
Exactly. Citizen band radio, exactly. Which Homer expresses interest in at like several moments throughout the show. Homer loves a novelty song. This is something I've realized digging into the references, but like
totally makes sense.
Most of his favorite songs are novelty songs. And Convoy is one of them. So it appears in the ad where for the microphone where this like, I don't even know, how old is he supposed to be? 7-year-old kid?
Yeah, 8 or 10 years old, like Bart.
Right,
yeah.
is singing Convoy into this toy microphone.
We're gonna roll this truck in convoy, cross the USA, convoy.
And then, of course, Homer sings it to Bart, imitating the ad. So that's kind of a funny nod, but that movie looks ridiculous, and I would love to cover it. Another movie that we actually have covered that's referenced in this episode is Jaws. And I think we talked about this reference a little bit in that episode, but when the whole town is trying to figure out how to get the boy out of the well, Quint himself shows up and basically gives a part of his famous speech from that movie, trying to convince him that he can get the boy out of the well. Okay, Beverly Hills Cop.
Yes.
So this is again kind of a runner in the show, which is interesting. Like, again, maybe we can talk about it in a separate episode at some point, but they love the Axel F music theme from this movie, and they use it usually. I mean, it's a great song.
Understandable. The song honks. Like, it's a great tune.
Yes, absolutely. But it's not used in scenes that have anything to do with Beverly Hills Cop or the plot of it or the characters or anything. They just kind of use it usually in like an infiltration sort of scene. Mm-hmm. And so we get it when Bart rappels down the well in this episode.
Yeah.
And then lastly, like a fairly indirect one, but Lou does read a book version of Cinderella to Timmy O'Toole, who's trapped in a well, which, it's indirect, but I'll give it a little nod to Cinderella the movie, considering I think that's still what most people think about when they think of Cinderella.
Definitely. What about mystery references? Did you clock anything that you weren't 100% certain about?
Yeah, so there were a couple more that hard to say. So at one point, Bart is, I think he's pranking Marge, and he is reading over his microphone this speech that's sort of clearly some kind of sci-fi speech, right? And he's saying,
People of Earth, this is Bartron, commander of the Martian Invasion Force. Your planet is in our hands. Resistance is useless.
Right. I think... So what I was particularly curious about was that phrase "people of Earth" has kind of become like a meme, that floats around in various places. And I was like, where does that phrase "people of Earth" come from? And what I was able to track down was that it appears to be from Earth versus the Flying Saucers, which would make sense because they have also referenced this movie at other points in the show.
Okay.
So... that one's a little bit fuzzy because it's like, sure, it could potentially predate that movie. But that is a pretty like influential B movie of the 1950s that is referenced on the show at other times. So that, it could be a reference.
Okay.
All right. Another one, Popeye. I'm pretty sure. So before they start digging Bart out, Homer says, "That's all I can stands no more," which I'm pretty sure is a reference to Popeye and like one of his sort of sayings.
Yeah, just the way he sort of speaks is like that.
Yeah. And like they often do reference Popeye in exactly this way. So I think that's probably what that is, but not 100% sure.
Right.
Okay. What about, so Bart, for Bart's birthday, he gets, or is it Homer's birthday or Bart's birthday?
It's Bart's birthday.
It's Bart's
because he has the
birthday.
coupon books.
Right. Oh, that's right. Okay. I was like, did he get Homer a coupon book at some point? I think he did in a different episode. Anyway. So Bart has a coupon book of birthday things, and so he's going to all these different businesses. And at one point, he goes to he gets tango classes with a woman named Rosarita.
Sorry, Rosarita. I gotta get to my birthday party.
Farewell, Senor Bart.
And just the look and feel of that scene and the distinctive character made me think, maybe that's a reference to something like Strictly Ballroom or something like that. But I couldn't really tell for sure.
Yeah, no, I was wondering the same thing, and obviously the Tango de la Muerte, which comes up in, I think that's the last Tap Dance to Springfield episode.
Yep.
That is very clearly referencing Strictly Ballroom. Like the guy is wearing the jacket that the guy in Strictly Ballroom is wearing. Whereas in this case, I don't think this is necessarily referencing a specific, I mean, I don't know, like there's definitely tango movies, and I know like Canon Films famously made a bunch of like, they made the breakdance movie, and then they made the movie about Lambada, and like, so maybe I'm sure it could be coded to something, or it could just be like, this is tango. I don't know. It's hard to say for sure, but you're right. Like it definitely reads as maybe it's meant to be a reference to something, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that movie would have been very, very recent at the time, and probably too recent to actually make sense for that. It came out in February of 1993. So, and so that came out after. Yeah.
So it's definitely not, but there's tango scenes in actually it's interesting. There's a tango scene in Some Like It Hot, which is another Billy Wilder movie. So like maybe that's right. That's maybe a little pulling at some strings, but who knows?
Yeah. They often also just use movie scenes and TV scenes as like a visual reference when they have to animate tango. So it's like sometimes they're not even intended as parodies, but they just happen to use something as source material. So that's a big question mark. Okay. When Bart pranks Rod and Todd, he sort of spins the microphone on his finger and blows it like a gun, which also, again, I was like, that could date back to the Wild West. Like that could be like Wild West shows, like something that predates film even. But like, I do kind of wonder where that sort of meme comes from. Right. Cause it's something that you see in all sorts of media over the years, but I couldn't trace it to anything in particular.
Right.
Okay. When Willie first hears, Timmy O'Toole down the well, he pulls his tractor into traffic, and there's a very distinctive music cue that's kind of like a heroic, like horns music cue. That whole sort of moment feels like it's from something, and it's almost like it has almost like a Lassie sort of vibe. So I was wondering if that was sort of the intention there, but again, it feels like a reference to something. Scratchy in the Itchy and Scratchy episode, they dive down the well, right? There's a very distinctive sort of like look and feel to that. Scratchy's diving position, I know that's very specific, but he's got this sort of crouched position that's very dorky looking, and then he dies and an angel sort of comes up playing a harp. Like that, again, that whole thing feels like it's probably from a specific cartoon. I know it's also a sort of trope, but like it's so specific that I know I've seen that before somewhere.
Well, it's really funny because as I was watching this, for whatever reason, because we've seen Itchy and Scratchy in episodes we've talked about before, but I did kind of have this moment of like, what is this actually meant to be referencing? Because it's like, I know it's like, it inherently on the surface, you're like, well, it's Tom and Jerry because it's a cat and a mouse. But I was like, the hyper violence of it seems too specific to just be, we did like a hyper violent Tom and Jerry. And so I actually did a little digging, and apparently, I guess Matt Groening has alluded to the fact that it was inspired by this Italian adult black comedy strip called Squeak the Mouse.
Huh.
And I guess it's this idea of a cat and mouse, Tom and Jerry, like, but it's like hyper violent. Anyway, I didn't do enough research this episode to get into it, but it might be worth us maybe doing an episode at some point. Like maybe we do this Itchy and Scratchy movie episode, which really isn't based on it, and like just do a deep dive into the idea of like what is Itchy and Scratchy riffing on, because like it feels to me like they're, as you say, there's certain ones that are very clearly referencing specific animated like moments from, you know, whether it's Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry or whatever. But yeah, I think there's a well that hasn't been tapped here in relation to the origin stories of Itchy and Scratchy that I am kind of fascinated by now, because
I think all of the media within the media on this show, right? Like Itchy and Scratchy, McBain, what is it called? Space Mutants?
Oh yeah, I think the Happy Little Elves and like
the Happy Little Elves, Space Mutants, like all of those I feel like could make an interesting episode where we could dig into all of the influences and maybe one in particular that's like the origin of it. So yeah. Anyway, that one's again a little amorphous. Okay, another music cue. So when there's that moment, an amazing moment where we're looking at Bart, and then it does the whip pan to the radio in the well, and it goes down the well.
Yep.
Amazing animation in that moment, anyways.
Yeah.
But the reference that I'm thinking of is the music cue is, again, very psycho-coded, right? Yes. Which I've been talking about over the last, several episodes. But just, they seem to be riffing on that score a lot more than I realized, and taking different parts of it and kind of remixing it in different ways. And over the years, it becomes less and less recognizable as Psycho. But it seems like actually a surprisingly big influence on the Simpsons score. Like they really make a meal out of that.
Yeah, it's like anytime they need to create music with tension,
right?
The starting point is the music or the sound of Psycho, and then, you know, not, again, as you say, it's not just like it's just like that, you know, Bernard Herrmann's score. Always ending on a like, so if you know the score from Psycho, you go, oh, that's clearly what the riff.
Right. I think it's like once they've created the sound-alike, then they use the sound-alike as the well they draw from, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no pun intended.
Yes. And then the last one, I'll just say, there's a spinning newspaper in this. Again, this is one of those ones where I'm like, that is a trope in movies, but it must have started somewhere, probably when they figured out how to technically do it, is my guess, because it's a very specific effect, right? And I believe in one of the commentaries they say it's sort of like from the 1930s, and maybe even specifically from 1930s James Cagney movies. Right. So it's like one of them back there is the first one that did this, but I have not figured out which one yet.
Yeah, for sure. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about the episode? I mean, actually, one of the things we got to touch on is like the guest star. This features Sting, and you know, he's good. I mean, used very, very limitedly, and I'm sure, again, this is early enough in the show where getting a big name like that is probably like kind of a flex.
Oh yeah,
but also at the point where you could get him, but you couldn't get him for a whole episode to be a character. So it's like they can play themselves and they can do a short cameo, as it were.
Right. But it is interesting, too, because, like, as we spoke about, Michael Jackson was the last guest star that they had who didn't use their real name on the show. And that's the beginning of this season. So this is, like, one of the early guest stars to use their real name on the show.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure the Stark Raving Dad was a holdover episode from the previous season.
I think that's right.
So I think it's like by season 3 they kind of made the mandate of like, yeah, you can be on the show, but you have to admit you're on the show.
Right.
No more pseudonyms. So but that is interesting. And again, it's sort of like, it's a nice use of a celebrity cameo where it doesn't feel forced.
Yeah.
And you know, I wouldn't necessarily say like it's contributing to the plot that much. And I'm trying to think, was Sting even in We Are the World? I think he might have only been in...
I don't think so.
I think he's in Band-Aid, but not We Are the World.
I think it would have been tough to have someone from We Are the World, because it would have been basically being like, that thing you were involved in was bullshit.
Well, fair enough. But, well, now I got to look it up. Band-Aid, band. I'm pretty sure Sting was in this. So let's just take a quick peek. As far as I know, he was not in We Are the World, although let me pull that up, too. But he was in Do They Know It's Christmas, which I personally think is the superior charity single. But
if you had to choose one, I guess.
Yeah, no, he's not in We Are the World. So, yes, he is in the original a lot. And it looks like, he's the only member of Sting to be in, the only member of the Police to be in it. So
also the only member of Sting.
Yes, he's also the only member of Sting. But it's a fun little, nod to what those things are. And that joke only works if you get a real celebrity.
Right.
Because
totally.
obviously the Springfield celebrities that they use are... I'm pretty sure
Krusty
Princess
and-
Cashmere's in there too.
Yeah, exactly. She's not really a celebrity, is she?
So
maybe after that famous photo, but yeah. Other things that I love in this episode are so the very opening has a reference. I think it's supposed to be a reference to Soul Train, the TV show.
Totally,
where Lisa's watching it, and of course Homer's horrified by her imitating the dancing on the show, but then sees what's on the TV and is quite happy about it.
Oh yeah.
And the thing that I didn't realize, though, when I started looking into this, Soul Train was on from 1970, which is when I usually think of it from, to 2001.
Oh shit! I didn't realize it was on that long either.
Yeah, so that's crazy. And you can go back to I was like, what was on Soul Train when this episode aired?
Right.
And it's Will Smith.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's still sort of like R&B and rap sort of.
Yeah, sort of evolved, I think, out of where it started into more hip hop and rap, and the band Funky C Funky Do.
Funky C Funky Do.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a parody of Milli Vanilli, and they make a reference to the scandal of the lip syncing and all of that.
I do believe we're naked. Yeah.
I do believe
the Casey Kasem is great.
Yeah.
Well, I love that.
Yeah.
I also want to call out the Neapolitan ice cream gag because
perfect Simpsons joke.
Me and my sister, as children, quoted that pretty much every time we had ice cream, which was after every meal.
Chocolate.
No!
And we both thought that was hilarious as a 6 and 4-year-old or 8 and 6-year-old or whenever we were doing it. I don't really remember, but I know we were children, actual children.
Which part were you referencing?
We would do the
chocolate dough.
Chocolate dough.
Yeah.
Over just over and over again. We thought that was hysterical. Which is it's not really that funny a joke, but
not on its own. The scene is great, but you need the visual gag.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah, I also love Wally Weasel. Perfect send up of Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah.
And just how crappy that whole thing is. And they have that tagline, "We cram fun down your throat."
Have you ever been to a Chuck E. Cheese?
Probably at some point, but I don't really remember.
See, I never have, so I don't. But it's always one of those things of I don't think I would like it, but it's such a 90s cultural moment that I feel like I kind of missed out on something.
I kind of hated stuff like that as a kid, though. I wasn't big on the costume character thing or any of that, but I probably would have liked the arcade part of it.
This is for literally 1% of our listeners because you had to grow up in Kitchener-Waterloo. But did you go to Sports World a lot as a kid?
Oh, see, I love Sports World.
Tangentially, Moose Winooski's.
Moose Winooski's, yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah, that was the closest I came to going to a Chuck E. Cheese, was going to Moose Winooski's for dinner and then going to the Sports World arcade afterwards.
Yep, exactly. But no costume characters. Instead, they just had a wheel that if it was your birthday, they would spin it, but you always got a pie in the face.
And you got to wear it was basically a baseball helmet that had faux moose antlers on it.
Yep. Classic.
Although I will say they did actually, Sports World, again, this is really for 1% of our, maybe even less than 1% of our audience, when it was actually Sports World, had a mascot, but it was just a big amorphous blue blob.
Perfect. Like a sports ball?
Yeah. I have no idea what it was meant to. He kind of looked like Grimace from McDonald's.
Yep.
But anyway. Sports World. All right, well, let's get into the film. So, as you alluded to, this is kind of this is a movie that I don't want to go so far to say doesn't exist, because it definitely does. Like, it's in the Criterion Collection. So it's now, I think it's a classic instance of like a movie that has had a cultural reassessment in the last maybe 20 years. But
Sure.
prior to recently, and this tracks because like even for me trying to find like a synopsis for the film was difficult because it doesn't seem like it was released on home video until relatively recently. But how would you sum this movie up in a sentence?
Yeah. So, all right. A down on his luck journalist exaggerates a tragic story for his own gain.
Okay, that works. That definitely works. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come right out and say it. I'm not sure I love this movie, but I think it's a fascinating skeleton and jumping off point for an interesting discussion, and I kind of want to see it be remade because I think there's... And to a certain extent, The Simpsons did, and in that perfect way of like... the way I like a remake, where it's not just like, let's take the original script and just redo it. It's like,
right.
Let's take the idea of the script and what else could we make from this initial concept?
Well, and like to your point, like if this was remade today, it would probably not be like a human interest story, which is kind of the framing of this.
Human interest stories. They tug at the heart and fog the mind.
Which again, The Simpsons also makes fun of in completely separate episodes. The whole idea of like I think it's what is it, Girly Edition, and they make fun of these stories about like people who are going through something or down on their luck as fodder for the media, right?
Right.
But it could be that there's just no room in this modern world for an old man and his ducks.
If this was remade today, and I agree, I think this could be a great candidate for a remake, it would probably be a conspiracy theory, right? It would probably be Pizzagate, basically,
right?
Something like that, where it's like unethical journalist is essentially just like stoking the fires of some horrible story that probably never happened, and what are the repercussions of that? Like that would be kind of the framing, I think, today. But it's so ripe for that.
Incidentally, Human Interest Story was one of the original titles of the film. Before it went through a couple of title changes, and I think the initial script was called Human Interest Story. But so, Nate, did you know about this movie prior to us choosing it, or like what's your relationship with this film?
Yeah, I mean, basically nothing. The only thing I think I knew about the story because of the commentary on The Simpsons,
right?
Because like Matt Groening briefly mentions it and sort of says, yeah, it sort of inspired this story that he like brought to the rest of the team. But that's about it. Like I like Billy Wilder, but I would not say I'm like a completionist at all with his movies.
Right.
And other than that, like again, this is not considered like a major Billy Wilder by most people, I would think.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't really on my radar, but what about you?
So this is an interesting story, or at least I think it's kind of interesting, because I was tipped off to this film by none other than Spike Lee, the legendary filmmaker. And yeah, like basically, I interviewed him a couple years ago, and in conversation he brought up this film Ace in the Hole, and was sort of describing it, and I literally had the premise of the show when he's talking about it, and I was like, that's a Simpsons episode. Like that is literally a Simpsons episode. That
right.
must be what that Radio Bart is riffing on. And then and I looked it up, and it seemed like very tangentially other people had like made this connection, although it's interesting that you say in the commentary they straight up say this, but it doesn't seem like it's one of these things that as a result lots of people have like made that connection, because I think this really is, it's not a movie that people are super deep on. But yeah, so anyway, Spike Lee tells me about this movie, and he is a huge fan, and on the Criterion Blu-ray there's a video of him sort of talking about the movie and what an inspiration it is for him. And allegedly, like, the final shot of Malcolm X is inspired by the final shot of this movie. So, like, yeah, he's a huge fan of this. And then actually another movie that he, similar, like, Power of the Media type thing, a movie called The Face in the Crowd, which I believe is a Elia Kazan movie. And he speaks very, very highly of that as well. And it feels like that is very much sort of like you could sort of pair these two movies together, and it would make for a very interesting double feature. But hadn't seen it up until this point, and sort of like ever since he mentioned that, and I knew we were doing our show, I was like, oh, this film feels ripe for us to sort of dig into. So I'm glad that we finally are covering it, even though, like I said, it may not really be to my taste, but there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff to unpack here. One of the things I want to unpack right away, though, is the movie poster for this movie, which might be the worst poster of any of the movies we've covered. Have you seen the movie poster, Nate?
I don't know.
Why don't you look it up and give me a live reaction to it?
Okay, Ace in the Hole poster. Wow, which one?
The one where he's choking the lady.
Ah, yes, yeah, that's pretty rough.
Yeah,
That's,
not great.
Not ideal. Yeah.
No,
it
not.
Also doesn't really speak to the themes of the movie. I
Sure
guess.
doesn't. It's. I mean, clearly the poster is trying to lean into the more noirish elements of the movie, which we're going to get into, but are the parts I don't really like about this movie. But yeah, not how I would sell this movie, and thankfully the Criterion cover it leans more into the newspaperman aspect of the movie, which feels much more appropriate. So that is definitely an instance of the home video release wisely choosing to not replicate the original key art for the film.
Indeed.
But anyway, so yeah, as I said, this movie was very hard to find a synopsis for, because I really, as far as I can tell, there was no VHS release of this, no Laserdisc release of this, and even like, I'm not even sure that there was a DVD release of this before Criterion put it out. It was very, very hard for me to find stuff for this. But I did find an alternative poster that has the following, I guess for lack of a better term, taglines on it. I mean, this was also of an era where like movie posters would have a lot more text on it.
Basically
to sell
a synopsis. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it actually does a decent job of summarizing the basic narrative. So here's how this poster summarizes Ace in the Hole. The amazing story of an ace reporter who made his own headlines! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. That's all in caps. With ruthless, ... relentless, ... stark, ... realism! Exclamation mark. It's capital tense! ... It's capital tough! ... It's capital terrific! ... It's a capital box office ace! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about some marketing copy, like selling the movie a little too hard, but this is like even the punctuation is selling this movie too hard.
And again, it's very much of an era.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, we're going to briefly go through the background. Again, this is an interesting instance because, again, I don't want to go so far as to say the movie doesn't exist, like maybe Day of the Dolphin or some of the other stuff we've covered, because it is in the Criterion Collection. But it is surprising how little information is out there about this, because I think just because its sort of place in the history at the time means that there's just less coverage of it.
And this was true when we covered The Fortune Cookie, also a Billy Wilder pick as well, but very little information about the background in that.
Again, if we were covering Sunset Boulevard or Some Like It Hot or The Apartment, we'd have lots to choose from, but there was a lot less here for me to tuck into. So, but the sort of long and short of it that I could find, and actually it's worth sort of setting this up, is that I found this little factoid that Sunset Boulevard comes out in August of 1950. This comes out in June of 1951.
Wow.
Which is an incredibly quick turnaround. Because, again, he didn't start this movie until after he had wrapped on that. So it's not like they were happening concurrently. Like, he makes Sunset Boulevard, and then he moves on to this. But this is likely attributed to the fact that Wilder, he got shit done. And in researching this, I found this quote from a book that Cameron Crowe put together. It's called Conversations with Wilder. And in that, Wilder claims that he cut The Apartment, the movie, within a week. Like literally wraps the movie and within a week has a cut. And Cameron Crowe says, I haven't quite figured out how you were able to edit all those movies while still filming them in such quick succession. And Wilder's answer is, quickly. That's the only way to cut them. There is no other way. The Apartment was done in a week. And I guess, again, I was sort of digging into this a little bit more, and I guess it was not uncommon. He basically would just use the first take. He might ask for a couple more takes, but he just basically says, yeah, the first take is usually the best take.
Right, by default.
Like, yes, the other takes might have, the camera movement is a little more precise, or like this might be a little bit better, but there's a liveliness and a freshness to the very first take that you can never seem to replicate. And so he often would just use that. And so unless, on the day he was like, no, take 3 is genuinely better, it seems like he very often would just go with take number 1, which of course is in stark contrast to one of my favorite filmmakers, David Fincher, who's famous for doing take after take after take to break you down so that But what's interesting, this is why I do think this is interesting, is that what Fincher is essentially trying to do is break it down so that you stop acting and it becomes natural, and you just start saying the dialogue as if it's second nature. And what Wilder is saying is like, well, in that first take, because it's fresh, you almost are getting that. You're essentially getting to the point.
You're seeking the same thing.
You're seeking the same thing. It's just if you screw up on the first take, then Fincher needs to do it 60 times to get back to the freshness that you, in theory, could have achieved on the first take.
And I think probably part of the Fincher thing, too, is like you kind of like come full circle back to a certain naturalism and freshness, I guess. Mm-hmm. But also you've then gone through all of the technical parts of the take 100 times, or probably not quite that many, but like 30 times. And so that stuff is also second nature. You're not worried about the camera movement. You're not worried about your blocking because you've done it a million times. Whereas Wilder's sort of like sacrificing that technical prowess on the altar of the naturalism. But that said, like watching this movie, you don't ever look at a take and you're like, wow, they really fucked that up.
Exactly.
It still looks pretty perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. But I just thought that was a really interesting sort of
philosophy
point to start from, is that like this is coming head off the heels of what is probably considered to be, well, I mean, the problem with Billy Wilder is the guy made like several masterpieces, but I think
it's my favorite.
Many people would probably cite Sunset Boulevard as his best film.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that this is actually the first time that he wrote, produced, and directed. And it's the first film that he makes without his longtime collaborator, Charles Brackett, who he usually co-wrote the films with. In the last 13 movies he made prior to this were co-written by Brackett.
Huh.
And I was listening to the to the commentary on the Criterion Disc with film scholar Neil Sinyard. I might be mispronouncing that, but he notes that Brackett was actually much more conservative and tried to sort of like rein Wilder in a lot of the time. But here, free from his sort of influence, Wilder is free to lean into his instincts and go full tilt. And I think that's why this film is a lot more cynical. Although, again, we're going to circle back to that. But seemingly more cynical, because Wilder is he doesn't have that person to sort of like say, no, you got to dial it back, Billy. Like we can't go full tilt. So I think that's kind of interesting. The film is co-written with Walter Newman, who Wilder had hired after he heard one of his radio plays. Like he was basically driving home. Here's this radio play. And I was like, I like this. I'm gonna call this guy up and I'm gonna hire him to write my next movie or co-write my next movie. It was also co-written with a guy named Lesser Samuels, a former newspaper writer who was also a studio contract writer.
Oh, I guess Greater Samuels wasn't available, huh?
Okay. I'll allow it because I did the Chris Columbus joke recently. Well, not recently in the airing, but recently as of recording this. But
that was like a year ago.
Yes, at this point it would have aired 6 months ago, but I made it 3 days ago. That's just to give you a context of how we're recording these this season. Anyway, Newman would go on to co-write The Man with the Golden Arm, which is a very, very famous Frank Sinatra movie. And he also apparently did an uncredited pass on The Magnificent Seven and possibly The Great Escape. It's a little unclear to me. I've seen a couple sources cite him as doing an uncredited pass on The Great Escape, but then other sources don't cite him, so I'm not entirely sure. And he also did the original draft of a film called Marooned that sounds like some real Nate Storing shit. It's basically about space guys in space who become marooned in space, sort of like a Gravity pre-Gravity, but they may or may not be cosmonauts. And I know you have like a deep affinity for space race sort of stories like that. So it sounds like something that would be right up your alley.
Yeah, that sounds great. I've never heard of this movie before, so I'm guessing it's probably kind of forgettable, but the premise definitely has my attention.
Yeah, it's directed by John Sturges. Okay, so like it's no slouch. But yeah, again, never heard of this movie before, so I don't think it necessarily withstands the test of time. But and then Samuels, on the other hand, only did 4 more movies after Ace. So I think he was more like again, had been working prior to this a lot, and then, whether he aged out of it or retired, I'm not entirely sure. But after Ace, only does 4 more movies. So this is another interesting thing. I got this from I found this book that I was that Wikipedia cited a bunch, but then I always like to try and actually go back to those sources.
Yeah.
So this is a book by Ed Sikov called On Sunset Boulevard, and it's just basically like a biography of Wilder and his work. But there's this great line in here that, as they're trying to come up with, like, what is our next story going to be? What is this next movie going to be? They kicked around a few of Billy's wackier ideas, one of which was a gangster who can't stop crying, sees a shrink, then plots to kill him because he knows too much, which... I mean, is basically the plot of The Sopranos and Analyze This. So it's just funny to think that, like, Wilder hit on this idea, like, basically 40 years before everybody else.
Totally. I love that.
So I like that they say that this is one of his wackier ideas, but it's like, it's also the premise of the greatest television drama of basically the last 30 years.
Right.
So it had legs. And again, it just sort of emphasizes what the prescience of Billy Wilder.
He was just really good at hitting upon a premise, I feel like. Like just these really like great hooks, right? What we would now call, I guess, high concept in that sense. But but they were also pretty grounded. They weren't like, it's telling that they consider that to be wacky when we think about like some of the wackier high concept premises that would emerge in like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Well, even the fortune cookie seems a bit wacky compared to something like that,
Totally.
So, anyway, ultimately, they sort of take inspiration from these real life stories. One of which is the story of Floyd Collins, who was he ends up trapped in a cave, becomes a media sensation, is covered by this reporter William Burke Miller, who then ultimately wins a Pulitzer for his coverage of it. The story was like extremely famous and has been adapted by, like, officially adapted by other people, including a off-Broadway musical that just recently finished its Broadway run. It's one of those things of like, it started off Broadway, was sort of like running in other places, and then eventually makes its way to Broadway just like last year.
Right. And they also like specifically call out this reference in the movie, like they mention this case as well. So yeah,
exactly. So and then it was also allegedly inspired by this story of Kathy Fiscus. Though Wilder has apparently denied this when he's asked about it, but Fiscus's tale is maybe closer to the Radio Bart situation. It's a child falls into a well, becomes a national sensation, and then was actually also adapted into a movie called The Well.
All the way down!
So it's just interesting that, like, this movie, again, Wilder says, no, I wasn't really inspired by that story, but, like, the Radio Bart thing is more closely tied to, because it's a child in a well, is... and, of course, Radio Bart is also riffing on... We didn't really touch on this, but is also riffing on the Baby Jessica story, which was literally this child falls into a well, round-the-clock media coverage. And I think the child actually, in that instance, was rescued safely, whereas in both Floyd Collins and Kathy Fiscus, I believe they ultimately perish as a result of this situation.
Right.
What's also interesting to note is that Paramount had very little interference during the making of this movie. I think, again... Yeah, well, exactly. Wilder was just sort of at the peak of his prowess. I mean, this is... I guess you could kind of, like, call it like a blank check situation. They just were like, yeah, man, you do you. It's fine. The only real... he had, like, Final Cut, and he had the right to determine the title of the film, although Paramount actually goes behind his back and retitles this movie The Big Carnival at one point. At least on some of the posters. The film, as far as I can tell from my research, the film was never... The film itself never had the retitled title of The Big Carnival, but some of the posters did. And again, this was not uncommon in those eras. Movies would frequently, if they didn't do well under one title, they would actually get re-released under another title.
Right. But, I mean, could you imagine showing up to this movie thinking that it's called The Big Carnival, and then you get this movie?
Exactly, yes. No, he made the right call.
Yeah.
Anyway, budget of $1.8 million. It makes a worldwide box office of only 2.3, and as a result is considered a flop, especially by the standards of a Billy Wilder picture.
Yeah.
And I think you threw this in. By comparison, The Apartment made $24.6 million on a $3 million budget. So, again, to basically just recoup your budget is not really standard or, status quo for Wilder. So,
yeah. Wild to think that The Apartment cost more than this movie, though.
Especially when you consider the production value of this movie. Though, again, we'll talk a little bit about maybe why a little bit later. Critical reaction in the U.S. to this film was maybe unsurprisingly mixed. There's a couple of critics who thought it was, an interesting sort of look at the media landscape, but unsurprisingly, for the time, most critics felt that it went a little too hard and was a little too nasty. Bosley Crowther, what a name, of the New York Times blasted it as a distortion of journalistic practice, disgusting and shocking to observe. And The Hollywood Reporter labeled it as brazen, uncalled for slap in the face of two respected and frequently effective American institutions, democratic government, and the free press. Yeah.
Wow, that aged perfectly.
Again, this movie is very prescient, yeah. Many reviewers complained about the implausibility of the story's premise, deeming it unlikely that a single reporter could control and manipulate a big breaking story. I mean, and again, for all this movie's, for all of it that didn't jive with me, the underlying core message of basically, the media's responsibility and the abdication of that responsibility and the way it can absolutely spiral into the worst possible consequences. Yeah, this movie was truly ahead of its time.
Yeah, and I think, in particular, the thing that strikes me is, the way that not only is the journalist corrupt, but it's the way that the interests of journalism, the interests of electoral politics, and the interests of industry can all actually be aligned in a very corrupt sort of way. And
exactly.
That's the thing that I think that's very particularly prescient and has something to say beyond just the story itself, right? It has some bigger implications about society that people didn't want to hear at the time, clearly.
Yeah. Wilder, Samuels, and Newman were nominated for Best Writing Academy Award. Story and Screenplay, I believe is what it was called back then, for their work, but they didn't win. It was nominated, I thought this was interesting, it was nominated for the Golden Lion at Venice, but ultimately lost to Rashomon.
That's not how I remember it.
You guys there, cue the Homer clip. But it did win the International Award. Which again, I don't know enough about Venice, but it did, it won something there.
Right. It also feels like it makes sense that a European audience would see this movie
1,000,000%.
and also I bet they probably like Wilder anyways.
Yes.
But then to see this movie, which is an indictment of American society, you could say, and all of its institutions, they would see this and be like, oh, pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, I think the thing that is the most interesting and probably why this movie has maybe been reassessed is that Wilder loves this movie. He referred to it as the runt of his litter, but considers it to be his favorite, most accomplished film.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting because, again, this would not be my pick for my favorite Wilder movie, but I definitely, as I said, I think this is maybe the one that has me sort of going, the most. It sparks the most sort of discussion and is certainly, I think, his most prescient film. Watching this movie today, it's it is this astonishing, holy shit, did he get this right?
Yeah. I mean, I do wonder if part of his passion for this movie is the fact that it was so he was so free to make whatever he wanted. And I don't know how that compares to like what control he had over his other movies, but I would definitely say like this is the only one that doesn't have a spoonful of sugar, you know, with the medicine, right?
No, exactly.
It's just like a straight dose of how he sees American society, I think, without, a Jack Lemmon at the middle of it being like, but I'm good. I'm the good guy, and I'm the one guy in this pit of vipers that's like, doing the right thing in the end. Like, there's none of that in this.
I think we really do need to. I mean, this is now our second Wilder that we've covered, and I would love to do another episode down the line where we maybe get like a real guest on the show, like a Devin or a film critic or someone, a film historian, because I think Wilder is just such a fascinating figure. And I've seen a bunch of his movies. I love all of his movies, but I truthfully just don't know enough about him. And in reading, I just basically read this one chapter from the book. I do think I need to read the whole thing because it's just like this guy has had such an incredible career. There's a bunch of retrospective features on the Criterion disc. Again, all the features on the disc are not related to Ace in the Hole. They're just related to Billy Wilder because like this movie didn't exist. So like there's not really anything there, but there's like interviews with him and there's a whole documentary like I believe it's called, what is it called here? 60% Perfect Man, a 1980 documentary featuring interviews with Wilder by film critic Michael Cement. So yeah, it's just like he seems like such a fascinating figure, and it's someone that I would love to like take a course on, both his history and his films. And
right, I feel like he's been eclipsed a little bit because of like New Hollywood and then the film brats. Like that sort of era of film so dominated like our understanding of film, I feel like, when we were kids.
Totally. But I think he was sort of he was the equivalent of those guys in his era.
Totally.
In a time when, the studio system still existed and the Hays Code still existed and all of these sort of like guardrails, Wilder was going to push up against those rails as much as he could. And again, ultimately, I think what it comes down to is the fact that he wasn't American. Like he was coming from fleeing Europe because of Nazism and coming to America and had this sort of outsider's perspective that he was then able to focus the lens on American society in a way that American filmmakers at the time either were unable to do or were unwilling to do.
Totally.
Which makes him just such a fascinating figure. So anyway, let's get into the film itself. And before we sort of do so, one of the things that sort of struck me is that watching this, I was like, this is the most Simpson-y plot a movie we've watched so far has had. Tone aside, I just couldn't get over how much the sort of like satirical premise at the heart of this movie feels like something The Simpsons would tackle. I mean, also, I guess they kind of did with Radio Bart, but it was just like, it was one of these things, and I sort of alluded to this before, is that I think maybe because it's one of those rare Simpsons plot parodies where they're taking the plot and riffing on that as opposed to borrowing visual language from a film.
Yep.
But it's just do you agree with that assessment? And it like watching it, I was just like, yeah, this kind of feels like a Simpsons episode just without Simpsons characters.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's funny because the other movie where we had this conversation was The Last Little Whorehouse in Texas.
Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, but yes, 100%.
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting, but yeah, The Last Little Whorehouse in Texas. I mean, it was, but also the best. Yeah. Anyway, so I think it's interesting because they're both satires about the media and politics and all of these things, and so I think that sort of send up of American society is the part that sort of feels Simpsons-y. Totally. I think the main thing that doesn't feel Simpsons-y is that this is missing the sort of James L. Brooks-ness of it, which is the relatable humans at the center of the story who ultimately have a bit of sweetness and have a little bit of reprieve from the horrors of American society, I guess. Yeah. Right. And so that's sort of the part that doesn't feel as Simpsons-y, but absolutely like the story and the way the town responds and like the sort of the cynicism about institutions all feels very Simpsons to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess ultimately it's the fact that this movie, in addition to being satire, is also a noir. And that's where it starts to feel less Simpsons-y, is the noir elements. And again, as I said earlier, those are the elements that don't really work for me so much, because it's kind of feels like he's, it's peanut butter and chocolate, except instead of chocolate, it's peanut butter and I don't know, like
almond butter.
Yeah, it's like it's two things that don't really work together. Like on their own are great, but together is kind of like.
Well, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. What are the noir aspects of this that are rubbing you the wrong way?
I guess ultimately it's the relationship between Tatum and Lorraine, and the treatment of women, which again I understand. Tatum's meant to be a bad guy, so it's not like we're rooting for him when he's doing these actions. But even just like the way the film ends with him being stabbed to death, and I don't know, there's just I was more interested in the, like, again, the sort of political satire, the media like that sort of side of things, and less interested in that whole relationship and that element. And like there's a, when he slaps her, apparently they deleted a line where she said, "Don't do that, I might learn to like it," and stuff like this, that it would feel like in a true full-on noir, like a Double Indemnity or something like that, or even Sunset Boulevard, like feels more appropriate. But it's like this or
is at least at home, if still inappropriate.
Yeah, exactly. Fair. But that to me, it's just like it felt like he was just leaning a little too, a little bit into like, oh, this is my shtick, or like I've had success here, so I have to bring some of those elements back in to make this work. And ultimately, I mean, as we discussed, it didn't really work in the eyes of critics or whatever. So those parts of the movie just felt kind of out of place for me and unnecessary. But I will also admit, I'm much less of a noir fan. Like that's less my genre. Like, I love the aesthetics of film noir, but I'm maybe less interested in what those movies ultimately are about and trying to say. Whereas I know you certainly have more of an affection for those. At least did back in high school when we tried making our own film noir.
I mean, what I would say is I actually feel like the film noir is actually sort of part and parcel of the premise of the movie, in the sense that it's like, so much of film noir is about these sort of rotten institutions and, and the sort of like corruptness, and often the character can't really escape the corruptness or is tempted by it or whatever. And the people that he trusts the most, I'm saying it usually is a he, almost exclusively, they are also corrupted by it, right? And so, to me, it's like, what this movie is doing is kind of taking something that is usually like LA, right? And transporting it into small town America in the desert. And so it's exactly that kind of story. To me, it still feels like a noir through and through. Like the character as a journalist, all of the other sort of supporting characters like that are involved in politics, involved in industry, also involved in journalism, the femme fatale. Like, to me, all of it feels very noir. And the critique of institutions is sort of part of that. But the thing that's interesting to me is transporting it into this different aesthetic world of being like, but it's daytime and it's a small town and it's the desert and it's like a place you've probably never seen in a movie like this before. So I find it hard to pull them apart, I guess.
And I guess that maybe speaks to, again, my general lack of understanding of noir, because, again, in my mind, I always think of film noirs as like, oh, it's a mystery that's like really dark and has really cool aesthetics.
Right.
And I think that's why I ultimately don't tend to love the noir movies, is I'm someone who, like, I love mysteries. Yeah. And I hate when you go into a movie that you think is a mystery, and then it's really, I always joke, it's like, it's actually about the characters. It's the Twin Peaks syndrome. But I think that's, at the core, that's sort of the thing with noir, is that it's not really about the mystery. It's about, as you say, the institutions and the corruption and all those things. And so that's where, in the past, I've always sort of buckled up against it. Is like, well, I love the mystery element and I want the mystery element and I love the aesthetics of it, but then there's all this other stuff that I don't really care so much about. But that really is the heart of what film noir actually is. And so you're right, it probably this movie is more more of a noir that I'm willing to, or that I'm on the surface acknowledging, and maybe I need to go revisit it with that in my mind. I think ultimately this is one of those ones where I was also sort of like, I kind of like how The Simpsons reinvent it better. Like, I like what The Simpsons has, the way The Simpsons distilled it down, at least that the sort of their, and I kept as I was watching it comparing it to the beats of the Simpsons episode, and which is not, it's not fair because it's not, as we sort of alluded to, the Simpsons episode really isn't, it's kind of taking it as a jumping off point, but it's ultimately a Boy Who Cried Wolf story. So yeah, it's just, I almost feel like I need to go back and rewatch this movie after our conversations and watch it with a different sort of context, and maybe I will enjoy it more.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. I think the way that we conceptualize noir is so rooted in the private eye.
Well, exactly.
And I think like, but there are like other noir movies that take the private eye out of it. And I feel like that's very much what this is there is definitely no mystery in this movie. That's not at all what it is. It's more, I feel like there's sort of a parallel track of noir that's about schemes where it's like, actually like, and that actually Hitchcock does this a lot, right? Where it's like, it's not a mystery, it's a thriller. And the thriller is about a scheme, like Strangers on a Train, same year.
Yep.
It has more in common story-wise with that in some ways of becoming entangled in a scheme. The main difference is that in this one, we're following the villain, really, and not the guy who's trapped in it through circumstance.
Yeah. Well, so Chinatown's another one of those ones where it's like, I've never vibed with that movie, although it's like considered to be like a great modern noir, and I like the aesthetics of it, but it's like at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't care about, like, this mystery is pointless, but like,
I don't care about the institutions.
So it's this funny thing of, I think you're right, and I think part of what it comes down to is, again, this sort of weird, and this is why The Simpsons is maybe an interesting sort of through line. It's like, my understanding of noir doesn't come from the noirs themselves, it comes from parody of noir. And what's the element that noir parody always is? Voiceover, the aesthetics, the hard, the hard talking private eye, and the dame, and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, that's not really what the noirs are about. But those are the elements that are parodied or referenced and pastiched and make their way into other forms of media. And that's what I associate with the genre, even if that's not really what the genre is about, because you're not going to parody the elements that actually
critique.
make it actually interesting, right? So I think that's more. I think it's just, again, it's a me thing. Like it's my misunderstanding of what noir is, and therefore not clocking that. But that's why
your taste. It doesn't. I don't think it's a misunderstanding. It's just your experience of noir. Through culture, and like that is that's what this podcast is all about.
Well, and it's so funny too, because like after you watched this movie, you texted me being like, "Holy shit, this movie's incredible," and like you gave it a 5-star review, and I'm like, "Yeah, this totally tracks. This is so much your shit." Like, whereas like. If we were to watch...
I thought this was like an absolute 5-star masterpiece, and is now my second favorite Billy Wilder movie ever. Yeah. So I'm like in love with this. But,
whereas if we were to cover Some Like It Hot, you would not be so hot on that movie. Whereas I would be like, this movie's a masterpiece. What are you talking about? So it's just, and that's what I love about our relationship and about this show and the opportunity it affords.
Well, and it is fascinating that Billy Wilder does span both of our tastes. And like the movies that I love the most of his are ones that you probably aren't so hot on, and then the ones that you love the most are the ones that I'm not so hot on. Like it's amazing that one director can actually span that full spectrum of our interests. So,
well, and not to reference another podcast, but it's interesting. Again, as of we're recording this, Blank Check, one of Griffin, David, please come on our show. They're covering the Coen brothers right now. And and they've only just done the first 2 films, Blood Simple, which is a classic noir, and Raising Arizona, which is a wacky zany comedy. And it's like, it's insane that these filmmakers, those are the 2 sort of like worlds that they're going to dance in for the rest of their careers. They're going to oscillate between wacky zany comedy and like dark, brooding critiques of like the human condition and society, and like that they can do both of those things arguably better than anyone else, and it seems like they're so diametrically opposed is insane. And Wilder is basically doing the same thing. Like it's so interesting to be talking about this film while also thinking about those filmmakers. because again, it's like very few filmmakers can do that.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the cast and their characters. I mean, this movie is led by the legendary Kirk Douglas as Charles Chuck Tatum. And I was sort of struck by the fact that as I watched this, I was like, I don't think I've ever actually seen Kirk Douglas in anything before. And I checked, and sure enough, I haven't, because I haven't seen Spartacus. But yeah, it's like he's this like Hollywood icon, and I'm like, how have I literally never seen any of his movies?
Yeah, I have only ever seen him in one movie, and that is Spartacus.
Right.
But that's it. And yeah, you're right. Like his reputation far exceeds my familiarity with his work. So
I mean, and then obviously, like, we know him from the Simpsons episode, obviously. But
yes.
The one thing that I would just sort of note is that this is, as a reminder of the time we were working in, Douglas was borrowed from Warner Brothers, because this was the era of the studio system when studios owned stars and creatives, and so like Paramount had to get permission from Warner Brothers to be able to put Kirk Douglas in their movie. And it's just insane to think that that was how movies used to be made, and we are absolutely for the better that no longer is the case. But
yeah, well, and like interestingly, of course, we talked about this in the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest episode, but Douglas moves from that like strict studio system to essentially having the rights to this other movie, and then like passing them on to his son to create it. So it's like it's really the beginnings of a very different way of thinking about these things. But interesting that we can connect these two movies, I guess.
But what is your take on either Douglas or Tatum?
So I think Kirk Douglas is incredible in this. Yeah. I think he's really, really good. He's such a tough character, because it's like from basically, the first frame that he arrives, he's an asshole. He's just a total prick, right?
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Boot, I was passing through Albuquerque. Had breakfast here. Read your paper. Thought you might be interested in my reaction.
You bet I am.
Well, sir, it made me throw up.
There are moments where he almost dips into a Mad Men style, like Don Draper type thing, where it's like you're like, he's an asshole, but does he have a point? And then by the end of the movie, you're like, oh no, he definitely doesn't have a point. Like, not only does he fail by the end of this movie, but once you have at the very end, you get almost like more context from other big city reporters, because he's this big city reporter coming to a small town who's like down on his luck, or actually kind of alienated all the people around him. Right. And you hear from other big city reporters who also think he's an asshole. Yeah. So I think that's an important piece of context for this. But in the absence of those voices until the end, right, he's sort of mentoring this young small town journalist. And you're sort of like, wow, he really seems to know his shit, right? But as it turns out, he's actually like absolute poison, basically.
Yeah.
So Kirk Douglas, I think, does an amazing job of believably spiraling downwards in this, and also having so much swagger and confidence to act like an asshole, but also act like everyone should appreciate how much of an asshole he is, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can't even say that he like humanizes the character,
right?
Because he does. I think it is an incredible performance, despite the fact that he has absolutely zero redeeming qualities. Like,
yeah, pretty much.
And I think that's, again, going back to what I struggle with this film, is like, we've talked about this before, where I struggle with movies where I don't have a character to root for. The movie is so cynical, and he is such an asshole that you're sort of like, you kind of want to see him fail. And, when he ultimately dies at the end of the film, you're not like, you don't really feel badly for him. But it's interesting that he's able to still make, this is why I'm struggling with what the term is, because it's not humanizing necessarily, but it's like, I guess it is in a sense, like, it doesn't feel like a caricature or a construct. You believe that he really is this much of an asshole. And it never tips into scenery chewing or unbelievability. You could find a real life analogous for this person if you strove to.
Well, and I think the thing is about this movie is that it's actually a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And like in the truest sense of the term.
Yes.
Not that it's sad. He is a tragic hero.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some level of sympathy comes for him. And like at the very beginning of the movie, like the first scene, I think he comes into this newspaper office and tries to convince the editor to let him work for the newspaper. And he makes his best pitch, right?
I know newspapers backward, forward, and sideways. I can write them, edit them, print them, wrap them, and sell them.
Don't need anybody right now.
I can handle big news and little news. And if there's no news, I'll go out and bite a dog.
In that first scene, he lays out what his tragic flaws are for this editor, right? He's like, booze, married women, and libel, right?
Yeah.
He says those three things. In the first half of the movie, right, he has a very clear goal. The goal is to get back to the big city and sort of win back the respect of his colleagues.
Yep.
And you watch him intentionally not be tempted by those three things. You actually watch him look at bottles of booze and not take a drink. You have this female character who we'll talk about in a moment, who is married, and you watch him turn her away and say, "No, I won't pursue this." Right? And you listen to him tell other characters that he's not making the news, right? That he is just following the story, right? And in the second half of the movie, we watch him one by one succumb to all of those temptations, right? Yeah. First the booze, then the women, then the libel. Or not libel, but journalistic integrity, right?
Yes, exactly.
Giving up on that. And so I think that's where like some level of it's you know what it is? It's the dramatic irony. Right? It's like we know that he's a tempted person who's kind of desperate, and on that level we relate to him as a human, even though we also see that he's an asshole. I think
totally. No, I totally agree with that, Reed. And again, it takes an actor of the caliber of the legendary Kirk Douglas to be able to pull that off.
Totally.
Because Charlton Heston could not have played this part. Let's put it that way.
100%. 100%. This would be a terrible role for him. He doesn't have the nuance to do it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Jan Sterling as Lorraine Minosa, our sort of femme fatale. What were your thoughts on her?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's okay. In the role, I think she kind of does the job. I will agree with you that I think this character is a little tropey in terms of like, what the role is she's playing in the story. Definitely a femme fatale, and she's like a woman who's dissatisfied with her life. And in the world of noir, I think that's often villainized and not treated with a lot of sympathy. Yeah. And I'm sure critics at the time read it that way and didn't like her because of her morals, right? But like now in a contemporary reading, we're kind of like, well, yeah, sure, she has every right to like get out of a relationship she doesn't want to be in and go back to where she came from or whatever she wants to do. But in the movie, it's treated with this sort of sense of like she's like a quote unquote loose woman or those types of things. And so there's some nuance there, but overall, maybe not the strongest character, I would say. But what about you?
Well, so it's interesting because again, I'm not saying this to like virtue signal or anything, but like I do struggle with these old movies and their treatment of women. And again, recognizing that they are not necessarily they are products of their time, and especially in this case, the treatment of the woman of her by Tatum, like he's clearly a bad guy. So this is not someone we should be emulating. But reading this book, they have a quote from Sterling, and it says, asked about Wilder's misogyny as reflected in the part of Lorraine Minosa, Sterling was adamant. No, absolutely not. She may have been hateful to the observer, but when you were playing her, you understood absolutely why she did what she did. She wasn't happy. People do odd things when they're not happy. She felt she had a right to be mean to Tatum. She wasn't on the make or anything. She just wanted out.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to me because, again, it's sort of like it's contextualizing the actress or the actor playing this part and her read on things. And the stuff that I'm not jiving with, it's like, okay, well, again, I'm maybe seeing this through a different lens, or a lens of modernity that isn't necessarily fair to put at the time. But yeah, it's just I don't know. There's something about the treatment of this character that rubbed me the wrong way, and just it felt just too tropey.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the poster, right? The original poster.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the climax of this movie, but, where essentially Tatum is attacking Lorraine with this gift that her husband, who we'll talk about again momentarily, Leo, who's trapped in the cave, he's bought her this mink stole, right? Mm-hmm. And I think this is the part that rubs me the wrong way about the way she's treated, is in this moment, Tatum tries to give her this gift from Leo, and she rejects it because she thinks that she's going to start a new life in New York with Tatum.
Yeah.
Tatum then proceeds to choke her with the stole, right? And I think the problem for me is the way that that's set up is that even though you think Tatum's an asshole and he's maybe taking it too far, he kind of is, in the script, is given the moral high ground, mm-hmm. right? Of being like, he knows how much Leo loves Lorraine, and he's taking vengeance on behalf of Leo. And it's a little ambiguous. Like, I'm not saying that the screenwriters like intend you to be rooting for Tatum in that moment, but it is sort of set up almost like, she's cheating on Leo, and it's like, whoa. Like, there's so many things going on that are sort of, f***ed up about that, right? And so I think that moment in particular feels, from a contemporary perspective, unkind and unfair to that character, and maybe justifying something that is never justifiable, right?
And to make it all the more horrifying, knowing that in one take, Douglas apparently went a little too hard and actually did start to choke her. Oof. And they cut, and she starts coughing and gasping for air, and he's like, oh my God, like, he's horrified by it, and he's like, why didn't you say anything? And her response was, because you were choking me. Like, how was I supposed to say anything?
Oh,
so,
Jesus.
I mean, it's just like
more safety coordinators these days.
Yeah, but it's just, it is one of those things, like, and again, that scene I think is meant to be horrific, but it is. That's the kind of stuff that I just really struggle with in these movies. So
right, I think the ambiguity of the scene, though, like, it is, he's taking it too far, but again, the script sets it up that it's almost justifiable, and I think that ambiguity is the part that just really doesn't hold up so well.
Yeah. Let's talk about Leo, our man in the well. Because this is an interesting role in that, like, he has very little to do, and not a ton of screen time, but like he's sort of the what is the expression? The fulcrum point, the center of the universe for this tale.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts on Richard Benedict's performance?
So it's interesting that you said that there's no one to root for in this movie, because I think Leo is the guy you're meant to root for. I think he is our Jack Lemmon. He's
interesting.
He's the one guy who is not, again, like, he's not a perfect guy, right? But he's repentant. That's the big thing, right? Mm-hmm. At the very beginning of the movie, we find out that he has been trapped there because he went too deep in the cave to steal a Native American artifact from a gravesite and sell it, right?
Right.
And but when we find him, he is already repentant and sort of feels like the spirits of the dead are why he's been trapped, right? That he's gone too far. His greed has come for him, right?
Yeah.
And then throughout the movie, we hear about his love for his wife. We hear about his desire to have a priest read him his last rites so that he can go to heaven, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. But unlike Jack Lemmon in, let's say, The Fortune Cookie, he is trapped in a cave with probably a broken leg, and he very well might not make it out alive, right? And so it's a much, much darker place to put that redeemable character. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, we're watching corruption run amok outside, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because he is a foil to Tatum, right?
Yes.
Where you have Tatum is also in a cave, right? Also going too far, also doing something he probably shouldn't do. And the question is, will he repent, right? Mm-hmm. And again, that's maybe where some level of sympathy comes from, is the parallels between these two characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's my general take, is I think script-wise, it's a really smart character to have, and the parallels between the two characters really work for me. Again, I think Richard Benedict is doing his job. It's a pretty straightforward performance, and again, he doesn't have a lot to do. He's mostly just lying there, and really the setup of those scenes is what makes them work the best, is like, the cinematography of like the way you're kind of looking down on him, mm-hmm. and the darkness around him and the dust on his face and his clothing.
Yeah.
And there's constantly this stream of sort of sand falling down on him,
yeah.
which both makes you feel like he is being buried alive, but also this feeling of like dust is so mm-hmm. claustrophobic mm-hmm. that he's breathing it in. At one point, he ends up wearing a mask, right, for oxygen. And so I think the way those scenes are set up is really what sells the character in a situation, maybe more so than the performance. But what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great read. I mean, again, this is why I think this film is so ripe for remake.
Right.
I don't know that it is better if we're introduced to him as a character before he is trapped, but I feel like that's maybe something that I'm missing, is like, it's interesting. We just recorded our Fantastic Four First Steps conversation, and one of the things you were saying about that was like, you felt that you didn't get enough, or you didn't know enough about the characters from the get-go.
Right.
And that's kind of how I feel with Leo, is like, I almost want to have a little bit more investment in him before he becomes the center of the narrative. But maybe that's also intentional, that he's meant to be just like, you stumble upon him and you learn these things as things go on. As more and more people are taking advantage of him, you start to learn more and more about him. And so maybe that is the more clever way of constructing the character and the plot. But I
also think he's kind of a symbol. And so it's like, if you dig too deep, it might just stop being believable.
Yeah, maybe. But
I don't know.
It's this interesting... There is an alternate approach to this story where he's your entry point to this story, and then Tatum becomes a character that is introduced, and the story ends up, circling onto that side. There is a world where you could flip how the narrative is constructed and where your entry point is. Like, I think of like 127 hours. Like, so it's just what is the filmmaker more interested in talking about? And it makes sense that for this narrative that Tatum is our introduction. But like, I do, and this is why I say, like, I'm just sort of fascinated by the prospects of how you could take the basic thrust of this story and play with it. There is a world where you could do essentially what the Bart Simpson of it all, right? Like, there's something to that I think is interesting.
Right. Bart is actually both Tatum and Leo in that story.
And I think, not to sort of tip my hand, I think that's why I love the Simpsons approach to the story, is that it kind of lets you have your cake and eat it too. Because it's one character is hoisted by his own petard. Whereas here, yes, Tatum sort of gets his comeuppance and he's killed by the end, but he's not really getting his comeuppance because of his monstrous deeds. In the same way that Bart ultimately, because he's trying to cover up for himself, he ultimately suffers as a result.
I'm not sure if I totally agree. I think he is undone by his own deeds. But it's more about like he's kind of driven mad, right?
Yes.
And mostly because of this parallel where he can see Leo kind of living his life in a more virtuous way, and it makes him mad. It makes him angry about himself and what he's done and his inability to repent and do better. And
it's just so funny
choices.
And watching the movie. And again, this is why I say, like, I kept comparing it to Radio Bart as I was watching, which was clearly not the way to watch this movie. But I just kept waiting for the moment where he would find himself trapped. That's where I thought this was going the whole time. Was
Right.
that he was going to keep making this take longer and longer, and eventually, like, yes, Leo might die or whatever, but I assumed, because they keep alluding to the fact that, like, no, this cave is going to cave in. It's going to cave in. It's going to cave in. And I assumed where it was going is he was going to go to get one last photo or whatever, and then he would be trapped, and that was how this thing was going to come to a head. Not that he was going to try and choke Leo's wife, she would stab him with some scissors, and he'd eventually bleed out and die on the floor of the newspaper. Like, that's not really where I saw this going, and I think I was a little unsatisfied by that. But again, that's just that's on me. Like, that's my assumption of where it was going based on my assumption of how closely the Simpsons plot was skewing to this, which it clearly wasn't. So, again, a lot of my reservations with this film are maybe not entirely fair, and it's just about expectations and not getting what I was expecting. But I think that's sort of, at the risk of sort of jumping ahead to the end, I think that's where my issue with the film is that I was expecting there to be a more clear destruction based on his actions and less about him, this sort of the self-inflicted driving yourself mad to the point where he suffers the fate that he suffers.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess,
and maybe my way is too obvious. I don't know. Like,
well, I do think I think, like I was saying, I feel like the sort of path to his destruction is set up at the beginning of, like, these are his weaknesses, and then he's gonna do it, right? And he starts getting drunk. He starts pursuing this affair, and he starts elaborating the story beyond what it actually was, and I think, like, those steps do kind of ultimately lead to his downfall because he starts realizing, I think, that he is going down the path, and that's what makes him angry and a little bit insane. And that's when he attacks her, and that's when he gets stabbed. And then, in those final scenes, it's like, again, you watch those other big city newsmen come and make fun of him and tell him that he's an idiot and that he did it again, right? And then you watch him beg for his job back at the small town newspaper and die, basically. And so it's like it feels, it's a very humiliating ending for him that is very much like a result of his weaknesses, I guess, in my opinion.
Totally. Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about the script now, because I think obviously all of this, we keep coming back to basically the plot and the writing, and so it makes sense that we should really get into that more. I mean, I want to ask you, because you are more of a writer certainly than I am. What did you think of this script? Like, does it feel a little old-fashioned, a little hokey, or did it feel, I think we agree that the underlying plot premise is very prescient, but how did the actual language and the dialogue feel to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely old-fashioned in the sense of, like, wow, they don't make them like this anymore. But like, I mean, I think it's just, there's so many little gems in this script. Like, it is such a clever script. Like, I'm a big fan of aphorisms, right? So, like, a sentence that just sums up an idea, and this movie's full of those, just like these beautiful little, like, one sentence thing that, like, says something about the world. Lots of jokes too that are, like, really like cleverly constructed and that kind of thing. Like, at one point, this is a very noir-y moment, but Lorraine tells Tatum, I've met a lot of hard-boiled eggs in my life, but you're 20 minutes. Like, it's just stuff like that. That's like, that's just a very fun line of a sort of, like, setup and payoff. So I think the dialogue in this is great. And then, as we've been kind of talking about, I do think the structure of it, right? Like, the setups and payoffs, the parallels, all of that stuff, I think, is really, really impressive and all reinforces the core themes of the movie for me. But what about you?
Yeah, no, I just was struck by how many great lines there are. Like, my notes from this movie are mostly just me jotting down, like, one-liners. I was like, damn, that's a great line. Like, having one of these in a script would be impressive, let alone this many of them. And I think, like, again, knowing that this is Wilder working with new collaborators, you have to assume that a lot of that is coming from him because it feels in line with his other work as well. So yeah, I mean, and I think at the end of the day, the thing that is so remarkable, and we keep touching on it, is just like how prescient this film is, and how well. So this is where I want to talk about the cynicism of it, because I think everybody at the time said this is a deeply cynical movie. Right. And that certainly bears out, but this is what I think is interesting, and this comes from that book I was reading. Wilder's future collaborator I.A.L. Diamond, asked in 1960 about whether or not Ace in the Hole was a cynical film, stated the case simply: "Sure, they called it cynical." And then you see thousands and thousands of people turning up at an Idlewild airport in New York to watch a plane coming down with bad landing gear. People clog the runway waiting for it to crash, and you ask yourself how cynical Ace in the Hole really was. Yeah. That was in 1960. Yeah. And now I think about everything we've witnessed over the last decade, even the last couple of months when we're recording this. And I don't think this movie is as cynical as people maybe want to pretend that it is. I think it's actually very, very accurate and very honest, and is a brutal condemnation of the American media and the American people. Because that's the thing that I think is kind of overlooked in some of those criticisms, where they're saying, like, you're denigrating the great institution of American journalism and stuff. Yeah. But what that ignores is the circus that comes to town isn't just about the people trying to profit. It's about the people who are paying those people.
Right, the people on the runway at Idlewild.
And one of the interesting things that I noted later on when we talk about the production is, like, Wilder said they weren't going to have to pay extras for this because if you build it, they will come. Like, and that bore out to be truthful. Like, this movie has thousands of extras in some scenes, and allegedly those were not paid extras. People just showed up because the set was so impressive, and they had never seen anything of this scale. So they're not coming to gawk at a tragedy in that instance, but that is the situation that is happening within the plot of the movie. Is like, this place becomes a mecca for tragedy porn, essentially.
Right. And I think that's, that is, number one, probably the most Simpsons-y aspect of this movie, is that 100%. It is about the people. It's not just about the institutions. And I think you could also argue that makes this movie actually even more deeply cynical than people appreciated at the time.
Yes, exactly.
that it's not like these institutions are screwing the people. I mean, they are, but it's also kind of like, well, but the people also kind of like it. Like, this is kind of what they want. And there's an aspect of, like, giving people what they want instead of what the institutions think is good for them. And that's always a tension, right? In society, because sometimes what the institutions think is good for people is actually not ultimately good for people. But at the same time, the, like, people just always getting what they want and only eating candy is also not really, like, the best situation. And so this movie is really like, it can get really bad. Bad.
It's the social media algorithm, before social media, but that's exactly what it is. It's
totally.
They've decided it's the line of, like, bad news sells best because good news is no news, right? Like, it's this cycle of people want bad news because it's exciting and entertaining, and so therefore if we want clicks, we need to have clickbait, and we need to have negative stuff so that people will then get fired up and comment, and then that will juice the algorithm and create this vicious cycle. This movie is all about that.
Totally.
50 years before the internet exists.
Totally.
Like,
I think the thing that people are responding to, though, is a little bit like, it's the Frank Capra. Like, what if Frank Capra made this movie? And the big difference would be that you'd have Jimmy Stewart at the center of it, and he is the Leo. He is the one man who can fix the system, or just demonstrate that, like, if we all just got together, like, we could fix this thing, whether it's Washington or it's, like, the greedy, millionaire in town or whatever. Like, we can take on these broken systems, right? And I feel like that's maybe what people wanted out of this movie, is like, it's okay to say that the system is broken, but then you need to show that the people can fix it, right? Or that a real hero can fix it. And this movie does not have that consolation.
Nope.
And I don't know that that's cynical. It's just not fun if you do believe in these institutions or you do worry about these things. It's like, this movie has no consolation for you.
No, exactly. And again, I think it's if Brackett had been involved, maybe he would have pushed Wilder to have that at the end, but he's not there. The guardrails are off, and Wilder is just holding a mirror up to American society and saying, look at what you are, and you're not going to like it, but this is it. This is you.
But I do want to, like, also, you know, just coming back to the script for a second, I want to say, like, this movie is not punishing for the most part. Like, you'll disagree, but it's quite entertaining.
Absolutely.
It's just that it does unravel in this way that's quite haunting.
Yes. That's why I sort of started this conversation by saying it feels like a Simpsons episode, in the sense that it can tackle this deeply cynical subject matter in a way that still has a lightness to it and with entertainment value, and it doesn't feel like, here, take your medicine.
Right.
Like, I think there is no sugar, but it doesn't feel like I'm being forced to drink my medicine.
It's like watching a tightrope act, right? Where it's just that at the end of the tightrope act, the guy falls.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's this movie, is like, the thrill of it is watching, hoping that this guy is going to pull it off, and not just, like, you know, get what he wants, but actually get what he needs, right? And it's not how it goes.
In a weird way, it's a little bit like All That Jazz in that sense.
Yes,
right. Like,
great comp.
you're rooting for this horrible person. Yeah. I mean, I think in the case of All That Jazz, you are rooting a little bit more for him than you are for Tatum. But, like, at the end of the day, that movie ends with him in a body bag. And it is a deeply, starkly dark ending that then is preceded immediately by "There's no business like show business." Like,
what a movie!
What a film! I do also want to talk about the visual language, though, because I think that is the other thing that is really, truly remarkable about this movie, is just it looks incredible. Like, especially by 1951 standards. So it was shot almost entirely on location in New Mexico. The set was apparently the largest non-combat set ever constructed at its time, which that sort of makes sense for if you consider what was being made at that time. Like, you know, these biblical epics, or like World War II epics and stuff. So made use of nearly 1,000 extras and 400 cars. And as I said, the you know, at the end of the day, Wilder was like, we're not going to have to hire extras for this, guys. Like, people are just going to show up. And sure enough, they did.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's important to say what the set is, too, because, like, basically, like, what they did is, if I understand correctly, is they, like, kind of built a mountain. Right? Yeah. It's like they built this giant, like, rock formation where most of the set takes place, and then, like, a roadside stop in the middle of the desert, right? And so, like, that's what everyone's crowding around, is this, like, new, you know, like, giant thing that they built in the middle of the desert.
And then on top of that, when the circus literally comes to town, there's also a circus. Like, there's a Ferris wheel. Like, and again, this is not in an era of, like, digital compositing. So, like, all of that stuff had to be there. And it really is, like, again, when you watch it, the scope and scale, it's so funny. I watched The Dark Knight Rises last night. And there's the scene in the stadium, and I kept noticing, I was like, wow, the stands are kind of empty at points, which is this weird thing of, like, you very easily could fill that in with CGI, and I have to imagine it's just, like, the Chris Nolan of it all, and being like, I don't want to. And I know that there was CGI, because actually then I found, like, footage from what they actually shot, and it was like, oh, no, they literally only had one section of the stand filled. So he's making a conscious decision to not fill in all of the stands. But again, it's just one of these things, and we talked about it with Ben-Hur, of just, like, there is something truly astonishing watching films from this era where you go, this is all done for real. Those are all real people. If there's that many people, there's really that many people on set. That's insane.
100%. I mean, you know, the contrast and everything, this is shot in black and white, looks great. But I think the other thing that really stood out to me was the blocking, right? Which again, you know, we talked about it, I think, with Jaws in particular, and Steven Spielberg as sort of a master of this. But like, you do get some really incredible blocking in this, where especially like people kind of walking in and out of frame, or just people like moving across the room and the camera following them to frame a completely different and equally interesting shot, essentially. A lot of people like moving in and out of shadow, especially in ways that kind of mirror the narrative in the scene. There's some very cool like long takes, like the one that really pops out to me. Well, there's actually two, and they both involve vehicles. One is Lorraine is like looking to leave town when we first meet her, and she's all packed up. She walks out and has this conversation with Tatum, and Tatum sort of makes the case that she should stay, right? And she's going to make money. Again, this is like all the corruption. He's constantly convincing everyone that they're going to benefit from this horrible situation, right? And she sort of thinks about it, and the bus pulls up, and then it pulls away, and after it pulls away, she's facing away from the camera and walking back towards the rest stop, like, and it's all in one shot. Like, there's a lot of great stuff like that. Another scene where he goes and gets the priest for Leo, similar thing. The car pulls up in front of this church. It's a kind of a long shot, but the car's in the foreground. He goes inside to get the priest, and all these kids that were like playing around on the street just come and like get in the car and start playing with the car and pretending to drive and everything. And then he comes back out and they all run away, and that's all in one shot. And it's just like, there's some really nice details like that are so fun to watch, you know?
And again, I didn't know this at the time, but like, I think upon revisiting, those are going to feel all the more impressive when you think that based on what we heard earlier, Wilder was usually using the first take. Like, So, like, exactly. Is he nailing all of this shit in one? Like, that's amazing. Like, I think he really, again, it's this classic thing of, like, we've talked about this before, that idea of, like, we think of comedy filmmaking, not that this is a comedy, but obviously Wilder has made a lot of comedies. It's like that idea of, like, comedy filmmaking is, like, set the camera up, let it unfold. Like, this is a man who really does understand blocking and framing and how to use that to forward the narrative, but also just like kind of flex. Like, there's some incredible crane shots in this movie. It's just like, I didn't expect. I expected this movie to be like satirical and all of that wasn't surprising. What I was surprised by was just like the visual language and how impressive it is. And again, like, it's crazy to me that wasn't enough to to put bums in seats and people for this movie to become forgotten as a result. It's like, at the very least, you would think that there would be conversations just based on how good this movie looked.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, one of the things we haven't totally mentioned, but like the way that Tatum elongates this crisis, right? Because like they kind of figure out very quickly how to get the guy out, and he basically argues, no, we should drill down from above rather than reinforcing the tunnel. Which just adds to the drama, because like you can see the drill on top of the mountain,
exactly,
right? And it takes longer, so the story lasts longer, right? So he's just milking it, right? But like all of the stuff from the top of the mountain where you can see the drill and you can see the crowd that's assembled and the cars, like all of that stuff just looks absolutely incredible. And again, like just it's showing off. Like, it's like they actually did this. They built it. They assembled these people. Like, but it's just fun to watch. Really fun to watch in that way.
The only other thing I really want to talk about before we sort of start to wrap up our conversation is just like briefly, I do want to touch on the sound and music of this movie, because I had actually just rewatched Sunset Boulevard about a month ago.
Yeah.
And I know this is going to be sacrilege, but, like, I'm really not digging these, like, 1950s era scores. They're just so corny. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is because we talked in our Rear Window episode about how that movie doesn't feel as dated as it is. Because remember, Rear Window comes out 3 years after this movie.
Yeah.
And I think part of what made that work is that movie has no score. It was all diegetic. And it's funny because shortly after we watched Rear Window, I watched Dial M for Murder, which I really liked, but again has one of these like honking 50s era, like corny scores that doesn't really match the tone of this like thriller. And it's just, in some ways, modern cinematic scores, I do kind of miss melodies and stuff like that when it comes to certain types of films. But I do kind of like how the David Fincher of it all has led this in the direction of thrillers having more atonal or non-melodic scores that sort of just are almost like soundscapes to help ratchet up tension and are less like honking horns being like it's just feels at odds with the tone.
Okay, but so we mentioned Psycho earlier.
Yes.
Right? That is a movie that is heavily scored, right?
Oh yeah. It's one of the greatest scores of all time.
So other than it being great, what is it about that score compared to this score that you feel like better suits, I guess, the goals of the movie?
I think, and maybe this is part of it, it's that a lot of these 50s era scores are still full-scale film orchestras. Right. It's everything. What's interesting about Psycho is that it's mostly just strings.
Interesting.
It's that Hitchcock hits on, the string. There's tension. There's literal tension in the strings.
Yep.
Like, that's not a coincidence. And so by stripping it back to being like, we're going to just focus on this one instrument. And it's funny, the thing that immediately comes to mind, too, Requiem for a Dream. That score is a quartet. It's saying, we're going to just strip it down to just these things. And again, that movie's a lot about tension and strings and tension, blah, blah, blah. But I think that's what it is. It's this idea, this notion that and again, that movie's 10 years later. Like, that's in the 60s. So, like, there is time for this thing to evolve. But it's moving away from the lush Hollywood orchestras that are appropriate for big MGM musicals, but are maybe less appropriate for a gritty noir. And, certainly, like, Chinatown has a great score, but it's very horn forward, right? Like, it's this idea of, like, I think musicians start to pick up on, we don't need to have everything here. We can pick elements and use those elements to create themes and those to sort of differentiate between style and genres. So that is, I think, what the difference is that this still, it's just a little too honking and I think that's the other thing too, is that they all just start to sort of sound alike. Right. Like there's it's hard to differentiate them. If you were to play me a cue from Sunset Boulevard and a cue from Ace in the Hole, I don't know that I would be able to tell the difference immediately. Whereas if you were to play me a cue from Psycho and a cue from Vertigo, I would be like, I could tell the two apart. Now, granted, those are two of the most iconic film scores in the history of cinema, so it's not necessarily a fair comparison. But you see what I'm getting at. Like, it's that idea of matching the score to the film as opposed to just sort of underscore that could just be taken from a library album.
Right. I think we maybe talked about this when we talked about The Fortune Cookie. And like Billy Wilder, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, his sort of take on cinematography was very much like, why would you do something fancy if it's unmotivated, right? But the sort of underlying assumption of that is the way that you shoot a movie is neutral. Right? It's like there's a neutral way to shoot a movie, and then there's like a few exceptions here and there that sort of you use sparingly, right?
Right.
And I feel like that there's sort of something similar going on with the score of it's like, well, of course you use an orchestral score. That's what movies do. And then like you might have a few flares here and there. Whereas I think now we've evolved to a much more motivated take on scores where it's like, no, like your score should have a thesis, of like a theory of what the movie's about that is reflected in the instrumentation, how much you use it, like when you use it, like all of those sorts of elements that I would agree that like, I think I've already forgotten what this score sounds like, It didn't stand out to me as like as a weakness of the film, but it is very forgettable. It's definitely not the thing that's going to stick with me about this movie. So I hear what you're saying for sure.
And again, it's not a criticism of this film in particular. It's just because I had been watching a bunch of these movies in close proximity that I was more attuned to it. Totally. And again, like I'm always more attuned to the sound of these movies. Like it's something that I think maybe it's because I'm an editor and I have to work with music and sound more than others. Maybe I'm more attuned to it. I don't know. But it is something that I've noticed. And I guess the other thing that is going unsaid here is that, like, we also have to remember, like, film, even in 1951, film is still a relatively new medium. And so we haven't maybe figured out, maybe music is the thing that filmmakers still haven't quite figured out how we handle it yet. And by the 60s and the 70s, they have a better handle and control over. And again, it's like, it's this idea of like film composers are coming from maybe a musical theater background versus I want to be a film composer. Right. Like, so it's going to evolve over the 100-year history of cinema, but we're still in the sort of like first half where maybe they're still working at the kinks. But that being said, I think, and we've touched on it a little bit, the element that I think is really unique in this film is the way that it uses the song.
Right. The original song.
Yeah, the original song, the idea of the original song. And like, again, it's just like this wonderful extra level of a dig into American society of like, we're going to monetize every aspect of this, including we're going to figure out a way to make this a radio hit and sell you the sheet music.
Totally.
Which is just this beautiful, like, scathing indictment.
Totally. And there's a really good moment, speaking of sort of diegetic music, where you get that original song and you're sort of hearing that. And then, the camera is sort of like panning, I think, across, or maybe even moving across the scene of this circus. And you have the live musician, and then you hear it sort of fade into the circus music of the carnival next door. And then that fades into the chatter of the radio host who's been covering this whole thing.
Telegrams that have been pouring in. I only wish that I could reach right out there and shake you by the hand, each and every one of you.
And it just does such a, again, speaking of a thesis, right? It does such a good job of drawing the parallels, right? It is literally a media circus. And this is before that term was coined.
Yeah.
So it's like, but that is what it's telling you through that sound design is like, it's entertainment. It's cheap like a carnival, and it's also news.
Yeah, absolutely. I the one thing I will say, just to wrap up this like section on music and sound, is that this made me appreciate Bogdanovich's choices in Paper Moon all the more. That decision to only use period pieces, to effectively have no score and just diegetic uses of music here and there. It just, again, like I that's an instance where I never felt this sort of grating disassociation between what the music is doing and what the images are doing and what it's trying to, like, it worked so much better. And I only compared the two because like it's a period piece and it's in black and white, and there's like it feels like there's similarities to that. I mean, it has a circus, so maybe that's also what's putting it in my mind. But yeah, it does make me appreciate those choices all the more when I see something like this where it's just like the music is just so not working for me. So
well, and as we talked about in that episode, like that's part of what makes it a modern period piece and not a nostalgic recreation of a movie from that time.
Exactly.
Is just that choice on the sound design.
Yeah. Okay, well, before we sort of wrap things up, we've touched on the ending a little bit, but is there anything else you want to sort of like unpack there?
I mean, I think the big thing that I'm curious about is, were you surprised by the ending at all? Because the moment where they fight, and, spoiler alert, Tatum is stabbed by Lorraine, because he's choking her. And I was very, very surprised by that moment that she actually gives him a death blow in that in that moment. And you don't totally know that yet, but it escalates in a way that was very surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've alluded to this. This was not how I thought this story was going to go.
Yeah.
So I was surprised by it, and whether or not I enjoyed it is maybe clearly up for debate. But it was, I think the thing that also was the most surprising was just like the final moments of the film, where he literally, goes back to the office, asks for his job back, and essentially says, "I'll work for free," and then just like falls flat on the ground.
Yeah. I mean, his pitch is quite something too, because it's a repetition of the thing that he tells the newsman in the beginning, the editor, where I can't remember the amounts he gives then, but it's something like he's worth $250 a day, but he can have him for 50 or something that. And at the end, he comes back and he says he's worth $1,000 a day now, but he can have him for nothing.
Yeah,
and then he falls dead. God, what a shot!
It's an incredible shot. Again, made all the more incredible by the thought of like, did they do this in one take or not? It's just so not what like, I mean, I think back to Sunset Boulevard, which has a pretty dark ending. But this is taking it to the next level. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that line is part of what makes it particularly tragic. And also, there's a famous story about Citizen Kane, right? Him wanting to have the ceiling in the shot, right? Yes. And this is one of those shots that has a ceiling in the shot, right? And I think it very much reflects the intent of that in Citizen Kane. It's this sort of entrapping thing above him, right? That puts him inside a box, right? And the shot is like from the ground perspective, looking up. You see his whole body. He's kind of stumbling. You see the ceiling above him, and then he falls dead. And his face looks like it is an inch from the lens. It's just, again, speaking of blocking, like the blocking of that shot's incredible. And it's lit in such a way that when he lands, his face is in almost total darkness, even though the rest of the scene is well lit. And it's just, I think a masterful ending, but certainly pretty bleak. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Nate, this has been a great conversation, but before we move on to our final wrap-up, of course, we now need to do our Simpsons speed round. So, Nate, are there any moments in this movie that felt like Simpsons jokes but aren't?
So, one of the things I definitely noted down is near the beginning of the movie, Tatum is assigned several possible stories that he should be covering, and they include a rattlesnake hunt, a soapbox derby, a tornado, and a folk hero that turns out to be a fraud, all of which
are plots on The Simpsons. Sure are.
So that was pretty incredible. The other thing that stood out to me is that near the beginning of the movie as well, Tatum does a sexy growl at one of his female coworkers, which is something that Homer frequently does. Yes. And apparently is a reference to Bob Hope, who sort of did that like sort of sound in movies and in his act and all of that. So,
that's funny.
Adam, did you learn anything about The Simpsons from this movie?
Yeah, I think in a way it's sort of this roundabout way of just like how biting the satire of The Simpsons was from very early on, but also like where that came from, and knowing that they're pulling from a deep cut Billy Wilder movie. Just really emphasizes that this is something that is in the DNA of the show, and maybe has been lost a little bit over time, or has become maybe a little less cynical, but for it to be this hard out of the gate in only season 3 is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Nate, does this movie still have some juice for more Simpsons parodies?
I mean, not exactly, I think, but to your point, like it's sort of the template for these types of like mob mentality episodes that are such an important part of the early seasons, and I would love to see them come back to more of that and like be a little bit more cynical and hard-nosed about the way people are about this stuff, and maybe a little less optimistic about human nature. So, Adam, are there any characters in this movie that could become a recurring Simpsons side character?
Well, it's funny because the whole time I did think that in many ways Tatum does feel like he should be like almost like I kept thinking like if Phil Hartman had ever played a non-kind character, like he's kind of got a little bit of Troy McClure in him, and also just in the character design.
Or Lionel Hutz too.
Yeah, like but all of those guys are a little bit too bumbling. But I feel like you could have a Chuck Tatum character had Phil Hartman not untimely left left us. I could have seen that, but also the newspaper editor really had that sort of Simpsons guest star energy, like a Springfieldan who isn't a complete and utter nincompoop.
Yeah.
And reminds me of when in Guess Who's Coming to Criticize Dinner, they have Ed Asner play essentially that role, because at multiple points he's kind of calling Tatum out on his bullshit, and so like that there is sort of a Simpsons energy to.
Right.
It's like the Frank Grimes. Like there's every once in a while.
Steve Martin, when Steve Martin's
exactly.
on in whatever Trash of the Titans. Yeah.
Every once in a while they'll have a guest character come in who is like kind of sees the town for what it really is.
Totally.
And so he sort of felt like he had some of that energy.
Yeah, in general, I was definitely thinking of just like, there aren't that many journalist characters or even like, bloggers or podcasters or like all, that whole like sort of media environment. There's kind of just Kent Brockman, who is actually an anchorman, right?
Yeah, well,
and it's
there's Dave Schulten, but like he kind of he's in these very early seasons and then is basically you never see him again, and it feels
doesn't really have much character, right?
No,
he's just like a throwaway journalist when you need him, but like that's kind of a gap. Like they could have a funny journalist character that has like a game, like whatever the game is, but like is either really sleazy in a Lionel Hutz kind of way, or is like well-meaning but bumbling, and or is a conspiracy theorist or
again,
whatever.
I really feel like had Phil Hartman
totally
lasted, I could have seen that being a character that either him or like Albert Brooks. Like it's like those are the two guys where they could have created a character like that, and those two guys could have handled it. But yeah, it does seem like kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Nate, are there any other movies by this director or in this franchise that The Simpsons should parody?
I mean, we've talked about it before, but Sunset Boulevard, it seems like it's sitting there. It's ready for you. I mean, it would be perfect for a Simpsons parody. I was also thinking about The Apartment. I don't think they've ever done The Apartment.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, truthfully, I haven't actually seen The Apartment, which feels like a real blind spot for me.
I have, but I don't remember it super well, and it's so well respected that I feel like I need to revisit it.
Yeah. But I also wonder if that's maybe part of it too, is just they're like, no, that is we're not going to touch that. It's just that is a perfect thing, and we're going to leave it at that, and we don't need to even try.
And especially with comedies, it's like you don't want to be compared against maybe one of the best loved comedies ever.
Exactly.
Same with like Some Like It Hot. Like, do you really? And I mean, that one, I don't think you can remake it in any way anyway. But yeah, those were the two that came to mind.
Totally. Well, that brings us to our final verdicts. Nate, did the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? Would you recommend this movie?
I mean, I think this is a 5-star masterpiece. I think it's one of my favorite movies that we've discovered through this podcast. Mm-hmm. And it is a very biting movie, but I do think it's quite entertaining, surprising, beautiful. So I would highly, highly recommend it. I think everyone should see it. You might come away feeling a little bit bummed out about society, but I also think that you'll be glad that you watched it nonetheless. But what about you, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, again, despite my sort of reservations with it as its entertainment value, I guess is the best way to put that. Mm-hmm. I think it's such a fascinating movie, and as I said, I would love to see this remade by, I mean, again, it would have to be a very specific kind of filmmaker, but I think this is a movie that is ripe for a remake, or maybe the better way to put it is a reinterpretation or a modernization. Right. Like there's a skeleton here that it's about something that meant something in 1951, but means even more today in 2025 or 2026, whenever this is airing. Yeah. That it feels like nobody is willing to sort of tackle that right now, and we need it more than ever, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So
yeah.
I think it's fascinating to watch just because of those parallels, and you go, wow, this hits even harder 50 years later than I think Wilder ever could have anticipated. So yeah, I definitely think it's worth checking out.
Totally. Well, Adam, is there anything that you would want to pair with this movie in a double feature?
Yeah, I mean, I was really sort of kind of racking my brain about what I would pair this with, and I can't remember if we've mentioned this one before or not, but I think Network which is a sort of, it's a more pointed satiration of network television and specifically network news.
Yep.
But I mean, these two movies kind of go hand in hand. Like that movie is a scathing indictment of, you know, what is going on in the newsrooms of America. And again, I haven't seen that movie in probably about a decade, but I have to imagine it's going to hit even harder now than when I last watched it after the events of the last 10 years. So that would be my choice. What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, like, I love Sunset Boulevard. I feel like I can't not recommend it here. Yeah. And again, it's like, it is a good pairing. It draws out the noirishness of this movie, I think, by putting them side by side, especially knowing they are so close within Wilder's career. So I think that is probably my recommendation. It's just, again, it is way more fun than this movie and dark, but also in almost like in a gothic kind of way, but all about Hollywood too.
There's a distance that you can have watching that movie because it's about a time and a place. Like that is a indictment of the Hollywood studio system of the 1950s or before, whereas this is a condemnation of American society, which is which I think makes
unfortunately timeless.
Yeah, I guess so. So
yeah, I mean, the other thing that I was thinking about is I haven't seen this movie yet, but it does make me want to add Eddington to my watch list, which has been very divisive, I think, but actually, from what I gather, deals with a lot of the same themes. Yeah. Not so much about the media, but definitely about the way that social media and the internet sort of seeps into people's lives and how it plays out on the ground, and politics and law enforcement and mob mentality and all of that stuff. So I think it probably is a movie that would play quite well with this one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've only seen the trailer for it, and that trailer gives me so much anxiety that I don't know that I want to see it. But it's maybe a movie I should see regardless of whether or not I want to see. But
right, I need another 5-10 years away from COVID before I'm like maybe ready to go back to that time and place.
I think Ari Aster is definitely a visceral filmmaker and a challenging filmmaker. So I have no doubt that movie will be equal parts challenging and visceral. So well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans. Next episode, we have a very special guest joining us. It's writer-director Alex Ross Perry, who joins us to discuss William Friedkin's unsung, or now maybe super-sung masterpiece, Sorcerer, and of course the Simpsons episode, Mr. Plow. And spoiler alert, we actually don't talk that much about Sorcerer, but we have lots of great Simpsons-y conversations, more so than usual, which I'm really excited about. So I think you will be too, so be sure to tune in to that. As always, if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave us a review and share this episode with the Simpson fans and film buffs in your life. We've also set up a support page on our website where, if you want, you can throw us a couple of bucks to help cover the costs of the making of the show, and we'll give you a shout out on the air. But of course, we've been recording these like 6 months in advance, so that shout out may be a little bit delayed, or we'll edit it in here maybe, I don't know. But anyway, until next time, Nate,
we'll see you around the Plex.
See you around the Plex. All right, let's get into this one. This is going to be interesting, because I think you liked it a lot more than I did. Which is no surprise, but okay. In 3, 2, talk about some movies of 1951. Nate, I don't think there's any way you're going to actually get this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you some clues to try and help you maybe determine some of these.
Okay.
Otherwise, like, for example, number 1 and number 2. Quo Vadis and David and Bathsheba, there's no way you were going to guess that those were the number 1 and number 2 movies.
Okay, but so actually, we talked about Quo Vadis or Vadis or whatever on our Ben-Hur episode, I believe.
That is true. We did mention that.
Yes. I don't think I would have guessed that it was the top grossing movie of 1951, but okay, so I'm sure there are biblical epics. There's got to be a musical on here.
Yeah.
And then probably a drama and probably a comedy would be my guess.
Okay, so number 3 is a musical adaptation of I believe it's Rodgers and Hammerstein. Mm-hmm. But I don't think you're going to necessarily know what it is, because this movie, it's actually a remake of a musical movie, because this I believe there's like 2 or 3 movies of this. It's Showboat.
Showboat.
So the 1951 version of Showboat.
Yeah.
Next is a film. How would I describe this? It's an adventure film by John Huston, very famous. Features Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn.
The African Queen?
The African Queen, that is correct.
Okay.
Okay, so that's number 4. Number 5, we probably will cover it. We should cover it. It is not a musical, though it is based on a play, but it's not a musical, despite what I may have thought.
Streetcar Named Desire.
Streetcar Named Desire is number 5.
Very nice.
Number 6 is a Disney animated film.
Okay.
And how can I do this without giving it away too? It's maybe not one of the most beloved, but it is definitely beloved. And it's weird.
It's weird. I don't know.
Very psychedelic imagery in this.
Oh, psychedelic. Yeah. Fantasia?
Not quite. Good guess. Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, Alice in Wonderland. Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, literally psychedelic.
Yes, literally psychedelic. Yeah, exactly. Number 7 is an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and I believe it is one of your favorites, if not your favorite.
Strangers on a Train?
Strangers on a Train, which I need to revisit. It has been on my rewatch list for almost a year, since we covered Rear Window. It's just like I keep putting it off, but I really do need to revisit that one. And then the next 3 you're not going to know. Captain Horatio Hornblower RN.
Okay, well that's like what is it?
The fantabulous flabtaption of Professor Horatio.
No. They remade it with or made a version of this character with Russell Crowe. I think something in Commander.
Master and Commander is
Master
based
and
on
Commander.
This?
I think that's the same character. If I'm not mistaken.
I didn't realize that. Okay, and then a movie called Across the Wide Missouri.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, and then another movie called Call Me Mister.
Also never heard of it.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So, like I said, not a top 10 that slaps, but a couple movies that have withstood the test of time and become classics.
Sure.
I really have to pee, so I'm going to do that quickly, and then we can talk about the ending and wrap up. Okay, I'll be right back.